Welcome, Rotarians and guests, to our Monday meeting. Thank you, Congresswoman Kaptur. I was ready to sing and dance. Just in time. We'll let the Congresswoman get seated. No problem. Seriously, you guys are lucky. I don't sing very well. Okay, today we have Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur with us on the Great Lakes Initiatives, but before we get there, I'd like us all to stand for a moment of silence, please. And remain standing, and Tracy Tangeman will do our reflection, and Kurt Hitchner will lead us in the pledge. But last Monday, April 2nd, David Allen passed away unexpectedly. David had joined the club in 1990 and actually had perfect attendance, and I'm sure he's with us today and continues with his perfect attendance. So let's have a moment of silence in his honor.
Good afternoon. I was reflecting today on Congresswoman Kaptur as I read she is now the longest serving woman in the House, elected in 1983, I believe, for the first time. Sworn in 83. So I thought this poem would be appropriate. It's entitled, "It Couldn't Be Done." At the time, by the way, that Congresswoman Kaptur was elected, Congresswomen numbered only 4% of Congress. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but she with a chuckle replied that maybe it couldn't, but she would be one who wouldn't say so till she tried. So she buckled right in with the trace of a grin on her face. If she worried, she hid it. She started to sing as she tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and she did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one has done it." But she took off her coat and she took off her hat, and the first thing we knew, she'd begun it. With a lift of her chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, she started to sing as she tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and she did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that await to assail you. But just buckle it in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and go to it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that couldn't be done, and you'll do it.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tracy and Kurt. And thanks to our sponsor this month, that is Spangler Nathanson for the month of April. And if you're interested in sponsoring and helping offset the meeting costs, please contact the offices. At this time, we have no visiting Rotarians, but if you have a guest that you would like to introduce, please bring them to the microphone.
Good afternoon. I'm Julia Peklavanos, and I brought with me a guest from the Alzheimer's Association, Lori Micah. She's our development director.
Welcome, Lori.
I have actually three guests today. Michelle's with the nonprofit Groom for Greatness. She's been with us one other time and actually filled out her application this morning. So welcome, Michelle.
Welcome, Michelle.
Dr. Chanda Gore has also been with us one other time. She's not filled out her application yet, but we're going to work on that.
It's never too late, Doctor.
With the University of Toledo. So.
Glad to have you.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much.
And then last, certainly not least of my guest, is the new president of the Rotary Club at the University of Toledo, and I'll have him say something.
Okay. All right, fantastic. My name is Louis Tehan. I'm the president and founder of the Rotary Club of Toledo. Over these last couple months, we've grown exceptionally fast. We've got to up to 50 members in 2 months, and we continue to grow and thrive and become an important part of this campus community. I really want to give a big thank you to the Rotary Club of Toledo for all of your support and help of us growing this organization. And if anybody's interested in coming in and being a guest speaker at one of our subsequent meetings and talking about your profession and your job and internship opportunities, I'm sure our students would find it very beneficial. Thank you so much.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
President Sharon, I'd like to introduce to everyone, although everyone already probably knows him, Mr. Bill Harris from WTVG, as well as Information Financial Services. So, Mr. Bill Harris, former Rotarian as well.
Former? Needs to be regular. Come on in, Bill.
President Sharon, I'd like to introduce my guest and friend, Matt Markey, who is outdoor editor at The Blade, and a shameless commercial announcement. Matt's going to do an article on our tree planting, which Rob will mention, on April 21st. So keep your eyes on the outdoor pages at The Blade.
Welcome, Mark.
This is Benito Vasquez. He's a senior at Cardinal Stritch who is shadowing with Black Swamp Conservancy this week.
Well, welcome. Glad to have you. For all you social media buffs, this is a great time to check in and let them know that you are attending the weekly meeting of the Rotary Club of Toledo. But also, once you've done that, please check out, silence your phones, and give yourself the gift of Rotary for an hour. I'll keep my announcements short today. We have a full dais. I just want to remind everybody that I'm looking forward to seeing you all this Friday at It's a Cabaret. If you have not purchased your ticket, today is the last day to purchase your ticket. It's going to be a great event, so let's be sure to get that. And really, what more could you want? Fun, fellowship, and the whole time we get to raise money for a good cause. So really, we look forward to having you there. We have a grant presentation today. Another example of your foundation donations at work. Can Mary Mancini please come to the stage with Rob Crane for a grant presentation?
On behalf of the Toledo Rotary Club Foundation, it is my pleasure to present a check in the amount of $7,500 to the Black Swamp Conservancy. The grant will be used to plant a total of 1,000 trees at the Forest Woods Nature Preserve. This site is regarded as one of the finest remnants of the Great Black Swamp and is truly a treasure. Its position along the Maumee River means that work preserving and restoring it will contribute to making our Maumee River healthy again. I'd like to invite Rob Crane, Executive Director for the Black Swamp Conservancy, to come to the podium, accept the grant, and tell us a little bit about the organization. So here you go, and you don't have to hold the check. Okay. I'll hold the check. You talk.
Great. Well, thank you. This is one of the restoration projects that we're doing throughout Northwest Ohio to try and increase wildlife habitat and improve water quality. We're really excited to be partnered with Rotary. The Toledo Club's taking the lead, but we actually have 7 clubs from the district that are involved. The 21st, we'll be out there. We'll plant 1,000 trees. I'll be leading tours of the deep woods, and then one of our DNR friends will be leading tours of the restoration area as well. So please join us.
One of our grant presentations says, now do I take this check back with me? And of course, it's just a prop. At this time, we get to welcome 2 new members. Bob Savage is going to introduce Mike Lasky, and Joe Sharp is going to introduce Whitney Rothkar.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Mike Lasky, who was born and raised here in Toledo, in South Toledo. Mike went to, graduated from Bowling Green State University, St. John's Jesuit, and Harvard, not necessarily in that order. In college, he he majored in communications and also with an emphasis in marketing and education. Mike has worked for companies such as Intuit Software, Nike, Root Learning, and has run his own business. He is currently working for Always Promoting and Maumee, branding and marketing via all sorts of promotional items and means. He's formerly lived in Portland, Denver, and Atlanta, but in 2010, Mike realized what I think all of us realized, that Toledo is a great place to be, and moved back here to be closer to family and friends and to give back to his hometown. Mike enjoys kickboxing, hanging out with family, friends, and mentoring, and is active mentor to teenage boys in the Big Brother program. And he loves connecting with passionate people. His latest passion, he has partnered with a European company, actually, and created a new company here called Moto Fitness to create outdoor fitness parks through the world, and is currently working on a project in Uptown Toledo and a couple others in the Metro Toledo area, trying to change the numbers that we get here for the U.S. being the most obese country in the world, the state of Ohio ranking in the bottom quartile of the U.S., and the city of Toledo about midway in the top 50 or 60 states. And as a part of doing that, he has joined the Mayor's Recreational Task Force Committee, the National Exchange Club, Sheriff Tharp's DART program, and Toledo Rotary. And just to give credence for other fitness things that have started here, many of you may have heard of Rogue Fitness, which is one of the fastest growing fitness companies in the United States, is now in Columbus, but it actually was started in Toledo. Unfortunately, we didn't keep it here, but I think Mike's got a great things going here. Mike currently lives in Perrysburg to be closer to his father, Jack, who is actually a guest with us, sitting next to Nelson Schaefer there. And I want you all to give Mike Lasky a warm Rotary welcome.
My pleasure to introduce Whitney Rothgar. Whitney currently serves as Director of Public Affairs at Thread Marketing Group, where she provides communication, counsel, crisis management, media training, and event coordination for government, education, corporate, and civic-based clients. Whitney is a Northwest Ohio native. Her career has propelled her around the country for more than a decade. After graduating from Ohio University School of Journalism, she worked with some of the country's largest brands and well-known politicians, such as former Presidents Obama, Clinton, and George H.W. Bush. Whitney currently serves on a variety of boards, including Connecting Kids to Meals, Public Relations Society of America, which is the Northwest Ohio chapter, Goodwill Industries in Northwest Ohio, and Leadership Toledo. She was class of 2017. Last year, Whitney received the 20 Under 40 Leadership Award, which recognizes individuals under the age of 40 who have distinguished themselves in their career and the community. Whitney is also point guarding the second ever Toledo Jeep Fest. She also was involved in the first one as well. And she works with the city, county, labor, and business leaders on this upcoming project, which is scheduled for the week of August 10th. To conclude, I encourage all of you to get to know Whitney and take a moment to chat with her today or at the upcoming ITSA event. She brings big ideas, a fresh perspective, and a passion for giving back to the local community, a perfect blend that I know will be used to enhance our Rotary Club today. Thank you. Please welcome Whitney.
Thank you to Bob and Joe for sharing the gift of Rotary. Gary Corrigan, do you have an announcement to make at the floor, Mike? You thought I forgot you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, President Sharon. I just want to remind people that Sound the Alarm, a national campaign of the American Red Cross, will take place April 28th to May 13th. Toledo has been identified as an at-risk fire city. The campaign's goal is to install 650 alarms during this campaign. Our Rotary Club of Toledo has agreed to make Sound the Alarm a community service project for our members. And we need about 40 Rotarians, their spouses, children over the age of 16, and so forth, and friends. to help us install 250 smoke alarms on May 5th. Now, in Toledo, Northwest Ohio Red Cross responds to a home fire on the average of every 18 hours. And the goal is to reduce death and injury from home fires. So please consider signing up. We have a sign-up in the entrance. And May 5th, we'll be meeting at Central Catholic High School at 8:30 a.m. for a training session, and then we'll do the installs. We should be done by 2, and as I said once before, lunch will be provided. So please consider doing that with friends and family to make a difference in Toledo in terms of fire and safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And thanks to our Community Services Committee for putting that together. So as you know, the theme to our fundraiser this Friday is It's a Cabaret, where the event will take you back 100 years to Gay Paris, where they're celebrating the end of World War I. But let me bring you back to the U.S. in honor of our speaker today, and where our own capital was in high spirits. This week in 1918, our House of Representatives adopted the American Creed as a complete statement of American political faith and entered this into the Congressional record, for the following was written by William Tyler Page, and I quote, "I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy and a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies." I don't know how many of you knew historically that we had something called the American Creed. I find it very, very powerful. So before we begin our program with Congresswoman Kaptur, I'd like to bring her up to the podium for a moment, please. Politicians hate surprises, but this is a good surprise. Marcy, today, the Rotary Club of Toledo honors you with a Paul Harris Fellow Award. This award is the highest honor an individual can receive from Rotary and recognizes service above self. We are honoring you today, not as Marcy Kaptur, the longest-serving woman in the history of the House of Representatives, but as Marcy Kaptur, our community advocate. Paul Harris Fellows conduct their lives in the spirit of the Rotary four-way test. We acknowledge your commitment to the truth, your efforts to make it fair to all, your ability to build goodwill and fellowship as you strive to make our community beneficial to all who live here. Congratulations, Marcy. And with that, Janina Douglas is going to introduce our great speaker today.
Well, it makes it hard for me to follow that one, but thank you very much, President Sharon, and good afternoon. As the chair of your Water Services Committee, it is my privilege, as well as my pleasure, to introduce our speaker today, our representative to the United States Congress, the Honorable Marcy Kaptur. I was going to point out just a couple of things, even though Congresswoman Kaptur needs no introduction. I was going to mention her historic achievement, which we've already celebrated, but I also wanted to remind everyone here and note that Representative Kaptur has always been a constant and powerful advocate for reclaiming the health of our Lake Erie. She believes that a healthy lake can happen and must happen. She brings her unique talents to this battle. In addition, to her invaluable tenure in government, Congresswoman Kaptur's academic background from the University of Michigan and MIT includes significant work on urban planning and finance. That means that she understands very well the risk to our region if we should lose this battle for clean water. And she also understands the rewards to our region if, or rather when, we do win it. So, with that in mind, let's welcome our speaker today, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur.
Thank you, Janina, very much, President Skilleter and your board and all of the special guests that are here today. Thank you for such a very warm and pleasant part of our day. I just left the new dedication of the Mott Branch. Saw your mom there, Bob. And part of being a member of the House, I just have to say, is that you actually get to know the people you represent. And because of the tenure that I have been afforded by the people of the 9th District, I've gotten to know them intergenerationally. It's a great gift. And it actually makes a better member because you can see over the passage of time how long it takes to do something great for the country. And I always use this as my base explanation when I think about a massive challenge like Lake Erie, a binational tri-state challenge in this watershed, the largest in the entire Great Lakes. When we introduced the first bill to create the World War II Memorial in Washington, now visited by over 50 million people, it took us 17 years. From the time of the first bill being introduced to actual dedication. So that gives you a sense of how long things can take. But one thing we know as a nation, we know how to persevere. And Rotary is persevering here in our community, this great organization where people come together, they get to know one another, and that is real. And you focus on important projects, important initiatives, and that's what really makes America great. So if you don't listen to anything else I say, just know it's good that you belong to Rotary and that service above self and taking on projects that sometimes seem impossible, like elimination of polio globally, for example, and yet it happened. And so when you actually set your mind to something, you can do it. I thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. It's been actually 4 years since I was first honored to speak with you about the challenge we face in preserving Lake Erie's freshwater ecosystem. Meeting this challenge will involve convincing 11 million people within the region, within the watershed, to develop a freshwater watershed mentality, a freshwater watershed mentality. America's never had to do this before. This is something new. This is 21st century stuff we're talking about here. And we are far from meeting that goal because Michigan has to help, Indiana has to help, Ontario has to help, and obviously Ohio has to help. Lake Erie is the 12th largest freshwater lake in the world. It is globally precious. And we know that we sit at the step-off point to 20% of the fresh water that exists on the face of the earth. Sometimes we forget where we live. It's Mudville here, the old black swamp. And it is so precious. The soils in Providence Township, there's nothing else like it other than in Ukraine. If you look around the world in some parts of central Canada, where we live is very, very precious. Sometimes we forget because it was a gift given to us, but we don't sometimes really see it for what it is. On the whole face of the earth, only 2.5% of the water is fresh. And before long, by 2030, 2050, somewhere in there, 50 nations around the world are going to fight over fresh water. We don't know how they're going to fight. We don't know whether they're just going to leave. We see vast exodus in places like Africa now, seeking a better life. but freshwater resources globally are diminishing, and population is increasing. Let me give you a couple examples of this. Every day in our world, 200,000 babies are born, and we have a global population now of about 7.5 billion people. If we look just at our country and think about fresh water in all of this, the population of our country was about 76 million people in 1900. 76 million. By 1950, it had gone up to 150 million. In another 50 years, 2000, it was at 281 million. And we are now over 323 million in our country. That's a very short period of time, really, 100 years. But during that period of time, no more fresh water was made. And much of the Earth's fresh water is actually captured in ice, and it isn't available for human consumption. So when we think about Lake Erie and our precious resource, we've actually been gifted in our lifetime with very easy access to fresh water. Back in 2014, we were feeling pretty shell-shocked by the 3-day drinking water ban on Toledo's municipal water system, and by our very basic but dawning awareness of the long-term economic and potential health impacts of toxic, harmful algal blooms that were at the root of the problem. At the time, we had more questions than answers. And what we understood with certainty was that for the 11 million people who rely on Lake Erie for their drinking water, and I represent a great number of them, and for the many more who depend on regional freshwater lakes, reservoirs, rivers, wells as their drinking water source, our response to this crisis needed to be urgent and driven by credible science, and it had to be achievable. Well, can I tell you we finished the job? No. But have we made a beginning? Yes. And is it a long-term pull? Yes. Today I want to share with you some mile markers on the path we have been treading since the last time we were together. But first, I want to recognize that the Rotary Club of Toledo has been a truly strong and path-breaking partner in deciphering this thorny challenge from the moment you decided to take a pivotal role in driving a public education and policy effort. You've convened 2 major summits designed to bring the most current information to your members and the public. Not an easy job. Communication is a big piece of this because the country still doesn't understand completely what's at stake here, and many of the people who live within the watershed do not. You followed your forums with a conservation tour of the watershed to ensure that your members and the public have a real-world understanding of the land and water management dynamics. You know more than the general public does. Rotarians have participated in water monitoring and sampling activities and other forms of civic engagement, and those are actually the foundation stones for what needs to be done across the entire watershed outside the boundaries of just the Toledo Rotary region. Now I understand you are preparing for a major tree planting effort in partnership with the Black Swamp Conservancy, and this is a spectacularly worthwhile investment of members' time and resources proposed because you understand that Lake Erie's status as the least forested watershed in the Great Lakes system is a contributing factor to our nutrient runoff difficulties. In fact, in Cleveland, Ohio, which used to be known as Forest City, they're understanding that they have to plant trees in Cleveland too. And there's a direct relationship between the number of trees and human health. And my golly, we found out that in cities we have many more unhealthy people because one of the substances we lack enough of is oxygen. And so trees are good for oxygen, but they also hold the soils and they provide enormous filtration. And if you really want a great lecture sometime, if you can get your hands on Sister Jeremiah Stinson from the Sisters of St. Francis, she will give you the most fascinating lecture on what she's done with the Ottawa River, and I would recommend her if she's healthy enough to attend. We now have a better understanding of the challenge that presents itself to us and a clear picture of the tools and resources at our disposal to effect changes in water quality outcomes. Yet 2017 gave us one of the largest blooms on record. stretching from the western side of Lake Erie as far east as Lorain County. I also represent Lorain. And when it floated over there, they'd never seen anything quite like it. In addition, the cyanobacteria produced by the harmful algal blooms, that's the bad stuff inside of them, remains largely a mystery in its potential health impacts and its wide variations in toxicity. One of the restaurateurs in Cleveland ran up to me at an event in Cleveland. He goes, "Marcy, I got a house out on Catawba, and I think I know a way I can vacuum that stuff up and make money." I said, "Go for it. Go for it. Keep working at that. Keep working on ideas to help us figure out how to not just keep producing algal blooms, but clean up the ones we have." The economic fallout for our regional tourism and recreation stakeholders is only slightly better understood, and the larger regional economic fallout remains difficult to quantify. Pictures of Lake Erie and the Maumee River glowing green have created a national image that is difficult to moderate. We have wonderful springs and early summers on Lake Erie, and in drier years such as 2012, little bloom activity. Lake Erie tourism is still very much open for business, with more people than ever visiting our shores to birdwatch. They're about to get here on Mother's Day. Island hop, visit amusement and water parks, and enjoy the shore and our wildlife refuges, the only ones in Ohio, our Metro Park system, and Ohio's largest park, the Maumee Bay State Park, and other recreational activities that attend. I want to acknowledge Dave Spangler and Lake Erie's charter fishermen. I don't know if anyone from that group is in the audience. All of our marina owners, such as Jim Stouffer, tourism advocates such as Larry Fletcher and the late Joan Van Offren, with Lake Erie Shores and Islands, and the many, many individuals who've been champions for Lake Erie's economic vitality under very difficult circumstances. They all belong in a Freshwater Hall of Fame, as do you. Still, there is reason for optimism as federal, state, and local advocates and agencies continue to press for solutions. But before I expand on that, I want to talk about this region's unique features that make it both extremely productive agriculturally and at the same time very environmentally vulnerable. For many of you, this information may not be new, so I will describe the region's characteristics as concisely as possible. The western Lake Erie Basin, where we live, consists of over 7 million acres of land, including parts of South Michigan, East Indiana, and Northwest Ohio. Its tributaries and rivers rolling and sloping toward western Lake Erie. Most people who live in this watershed think it is flat, and they still do not understand that it is an undulating plain of enormous proportion. An estimated 1.2 million people live in this watershed, and probably now close to 11 million animals. Changes in land use, including development and changing farming methods, have added to the region's susceptibility to runoff, and the former Great Black Swamp likely is one of the most heavily tiled places in America, which means when it rains, the water rushes into those drains and tiles and goes right directly into Lake Erie. Maybe it's the urban planner in me, but I love maps, and I'm always looking for the best representation of the place we called home, and I still don't have it yet. Behind us, right here, is a map that delineates the former Great Black Swamp, represented by the darker green, shadowy area, which is now our fertile, agriculturally productive bowl, precious, so precious in a global sense. God's not making any more of it. That's it. And there are very few places that can feed the world and our own people as can we. The map also features the Maumee and other rivers as they bend toward the bay and lake. But most people who look at that map have no idea which way the rivers flow. So I'm still not satisfied with the map. I don't know if I can put little arrows on there or what, but I've got to get people to understand that it undulates and then it goes toward the lake. That is not, and I want to make placemats for every church social, every school, every restaurant, and I just want to take it around the region. Maybe Rotary can help me figure out how to do that. Toledo is highlighted there by the Veterans Glass City Skyway, and it's Toledo is at the very bottom of this tilted bowl, where the Maumee River, the largest river in the Great Lakes system, meets Maumee Bay and western Lake Erie. So it isn't flat. It isn't. Bowling was not invented here. It is undulating, and we need to understand that. And because it is not in people's minds, they're not as anxious to help because they don't see it. When a drop of rain falls near the St. Joseph River in Indiana, they don't understand that it eventually gets into Lake Erie. It follows then that the activities on the upper watershed will impact water quality at the bottom of the bowl, our city, and others along the coastline. So when the press tries to deal with this issue, they tend to come to the Toledo water plant. Really? That's the last place they should go, as important as it is in the whole regional dimension. In addition, the western basin of Lake Erie is the shallowest and warmest part of the Great Lakes system, and that is both a blessing and a source of great vulnerability. Because of these traits, western Lake Erie has more fish and more abundant biological activity than any other part of our Great Lakes system. But these same natural characteristics provide perfect conditions for the harmful algal bloom outbreaks we have experienced. And you know, as it's been raining this spring, how many of you have been thinking with me, what's going to happen in August? What's going to happen in September when that water works its way into the lake? Since the very important passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972, Lake Erie had been on a path to recovery. Point sources such as wastewater treatment plants, industrial outfalls, and sewage outfalls were brought into regulatory compliance, often at great expense to cities and businesses. But America did it. We did it. We did it here. Phosphates were removed from detergents and other formulas to help support freshwater recovery. America got smarter. In 1970, Earth Day was declared, and we began to think, hey, you know what? Maybe we're in this together somehow. Maybe the earth needs us and we need the earth. But the consciousness was just beginning to develop. And Lake Erie and other freshwater bodies responded. We were encouraged and affirmed in our efforts to heal our compromised freshwater resources, especially here in the industrial heartland, where our manufacturing demands so much water. However, here on Lake Erie, the arc of recovery began a downward turn in the mid-1990s. A change which, like scientists tell us, coincides with regional weather patterns. And these new warmer weather patterns bring with them sudden, intense spring and early summer rains that force fertilizer and nutrient-rich livestock waste into ditches, streams, and rivers across the watershed. Research tells us that 2/3 or more of the excessive nutrients in the western Lake Erie Basin can be attributed to agricultural runoff, either commercial fertilizer or livestock waste. This is our challenge in this bowl. We have to figure out how to do it all simultaneously, but not hurt the water. So what has changed since September of 2014 when I was first invited to speak with you? Let's talk first about the most urgent concern, ensuring that our drinking water is safe for those who draw from the Toledo system. Here in Toledo and across the coast, wherever drinking water is drawn from Lake Erie or its tributaries, investments have been made in drinking water treatment plants, technologies, and operations to protect our drinking water. The city of Toledo alone will invest over $500 million, $500 million in treatment plant upgrades, and we're all paying those additional bills. We have been assured that these upgrades mean we will never have a repeat of the August 2014 drinking water crisis. But that doesn't mean the water challenge goes away. It only means we figured out how to filter more stuff out of the water. Second, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, after repeated calls by myself and other members of the House and Senate, published much-needed advisory information on microsystem limits in drinking water. That's the bad stuff. Until the release of that Environmental Protection Agency health advisory, Ohio's water treatment plants were using recommendations set by the World Health Organization, not ones that had gone through the United States Environmental Protection Agency's science-based guidance process. In 2015, I, along with Senators Brown and Portman, introduced the Safe and Secure Drinking Water Act aimed at fast-tracking the process of producing a usable health advisory. Can you imagine? It's the 21st century already, and we didn't even have an advisory of what was safe in drinking water in terms of the microcystin. The non-binding health advisory was published in May 2015, and for the first time provided a far more conservative recommendation for infants and small children over a 10-day exposure than the one we had been using before, and a somewhat higher recommendation for adults. The importance of this science-based, more current and appropriate recommendation for treatment plants in the United States cannot be overstated. I remember meeting a family that had gone over to one of our beaches in Erie County, right off the shore. And they said, Marcy, we don't understand. Our little baby, is 4 months old, and we had her floating in Lake Erie, and she got so sick. Well, yeah, she got so sick because she ingested some of the bad stuff from the lake. They had no idea. They had no idea. Finally, federal agencies such as NASA, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Environmental Protection Agency have collaborated on another science-based resource designed to ensure that our drinking water will remain safe. The bulletin that they have created, tested, and developed as an early warning tool on Lake Erie allows us to track a bloom's appearance, its expansion, and its movement, which is really important for our water plants. And for those who use Lake Erie for other purposes such as fishing. This fully operational forecasting system gives drinking water treatment plant operators real-time information about a bloom's proximity to their plant and provides a useful template for other regions of our country and other parts of the globe. So we made progress relatively quickly on the most urgent consideration, protecting our drinking water against the harmful toxic contaminants in it, but our focus must also be on reducing excessive nutrient runoff in the first place. This is a much more complicated and slower endeavor. You got your hands in the dirt already and in the water, and federal funding has been applied to a variety of programs to achieve this end. Indeed, millions of dollars has been spent to date already. As co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force and the member of Congress with the longest coastal district along Lake Erie, I've fought to preserve funding for something called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Working across the aisle, my counterpart, David Joyce from the Cleveland area and the Ashtabula area, we made sure that that funding was not reduced, despite the fact that the Trump administration submitted a budget that zeroed out the funds for the Great Lakes. Because we were able to restore it in the recent measure that passed Congress, it means we will be able to continue to invest in our wetlands, in shoreline restoration and stabilization efforts, in habitat restoration, in conservation easements, and other ecosystem designs that reduce nutrient runoff. These are all ways that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is being used. The recent bill I mentioned once again drew bipartisan support for this initiative, along with vital funding increases for clean water, state revolving funds, and rural infrastructure investments so vital to solution of this problem. And I must say, and I say this as a member of the House, because Congress gets a bad rap sometimes, and it deserves a lot of that, but I just have to say, there's an executive branch, there's a legislative branch, and there's a judicial branch, and the legislative branch is the first branch that is written up in the Constitution, and I believe we have met our obligation to this country on a bipartisan basis in the bill we just passed, and the President did sign it. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is providing that steady funding stream that brings private partners to the table. Other federal sources have been directed to our reduction goals as well. And in the 2014 Farm Bill, and there's a new Farm Bill about to come up, a new program was initiated called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program that allowed critical conservation areas to apply for conservation grants above and beyond the regular U.S. Department of Agriculture Conservation Program. The application advanced by the Tri-State Western Lake Erie Basin Collaborative Working Group was considered the gold standard proposal and brought millions of dollars in conservation investments into this watershed. Cover cropping, conservation set-asides, wetlands, and other on-ground nutrient management strategies which are critical. We could say, well, are they working? We know we're headed, where are we? We're headed to first base. We're no longer just up at the batter's box there. We're headed toward first base. We certainly haven't turned the corner on the presence of excessive nutrients yet, but we have been able to gain a sense of which direction we're headed and what more we need to do to solve the problem inside this watershed. Our thinking is much more organized. Now, are the 40% nutrient reduction goals realistic and achievable? When we see the third largest algal bloom on record over this past summer, we can't help but ask ourselves the hard questions. Are we making progress fast enough? I believe the answer once again is let's follow the science. This means funding research on edge-of-field programs. And remember how many acres we're talking about here. Millions and millions of acres. This is not easy to do. Virtual imaging can help us, but it's not sufficient. We have to have comparative outcomes for specific conservation investments. We have to have research that identifies differences between manure inputs and commercial fertilizers. We need the science that hones in very specifically on sources of nutrients. We have to look at the contribution of legacy nutrients already that might be in the soils from over-application in the past, and the engineering and technical strategies that help to direct nutrient inputs only to fields where they are truly needed. So agriculture is going to become even more scientific than it already is. It must in this watershed if Lake Erie is to survive. And I hope that in the new Farm Bill we might have suggestions from people in this audience and other places on what more we can do to make agriculture in America even wiser, even more effective in the manner in which we live. And we're going to have to figure this out. This is our century's job because of population growth and because of what is already happening. We're sort of at the tip of the spear here. We can see what's happening. The other Great Lakes are deeper. They're going to fade, and they don't have quite as much agriculture as we do in some places, but we're going to have to figure this out together. Research findings on many of these areas are pending, and water quality research is expanding, and I believe we will find the answers we need to ensure that our investments in watershed nutrient management are the most effective and efficient in meeting our reduction goals. So, where to focus? First of all, I would say to Rotary, think about, with the communications specialists that were mentioned, that sit in the audience here today, think about Rotary using its power, perhaps not necessarily this year, but maybe next year, around April 22nd, Earth Day. Think about how you might do a virtual convening of your Rotary chapters within the watershed. Think about engaging the mayors from those places and the county commissioners. We're going to need them all, including from the Canadian side with the Thames River and what happens in the Western Basin because of the runoff from Canada. I think Rotary can use its power in a way that would be extraordinary. Number two, I'm going to talk a little bit more here about research. That's another focus. So one is communication, trying to present what is this place we're talking about, and to present it in a way that shows us at the tip of the spear, the cutting edge, the place in America that's inventing the solution for the 21st century. I think it's a real opportunity. Secondly, I'm going to talk about research, additionally. Third, I'm going to talk about farm challenges. Fourth, a freshwater labeling idea that you can give me comment on later. And finally, a federally sanctioned watershed alliance. So those are the directions I think we need to head. First, we must continue funding applied research initiatives that will support good public policy, whether it's through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, through our Oceans and Atmospheric Administration, or the Sea Grant program that comes to Ohio and then is distributed regionally to support our research universities such as the University of Toledo, Bowling Green State University, the Ohio State University, Case Western Reserve, and others, or through our own federal agency research and design platforms. We must expedite the answers to the puzzle we are confronting out there. And frankly, if you have any Rotary members, any Rotarians that are retired, or if you have the ability to do loaned executive programs, I would accept anybody, that wants to come to Washington and sit in our office and go visit every single agency that could bring money home to us here in this region in the various programs that we are talking about. Because quite frankly, we do abdicate some discretionary dollars that could come to us if people but applied. Some of the most promising science to address the challenges that face us happen at the U.S. Geological Survey. Scientists there have developed new real-time water quality monitors, which in partnership with our universities are starting to provide really a clear view of what is happening and where it is happening in our watershed. They save money, these monitors, by providing data remotely, replacing the need for staff to regularly visit the monitors and take results. So we need to tech up the science a little bit there. In the recently passed bill I referenced in Congress, we included language to increase funding for work on forecasting and mitigating harmful algal blooms through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I voted for increases in competitive research grants at the Coastal Science and Assessment Program, and the University of Toledo, Ohio State University Stone Lab have already won awards from those institutions in the past for harmful algal blooms, and they could continue to bring those dollars home if they apply. We've increased funding in Sea Grant, and not as much as I would like to see the level increase, but nonetheless it has been kept in business. And we've included language to increase the U.S. Geological Survey's funding for a comprehensive research study of harmful algal blooms. Let's hope our universities engage on those federal opportunities. And again, we recognize the importance of our state's Clean and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund by providing additional funding for the remainder of this year. But the reason I mentioned loaned executive is because the bill was passed so late, 6 months late. For this fiscal year of 2018, we have 6 months to draw the money down. By the end of September 30th, that ends the federal fiscal year for 2018. So there is some necessity for added dispatch in accessing those dollars. Please know I'll work to maintain each of these line items that advance our understanding of harmful algal blooms to enable us to target our reduction efforts to the most effective, safe, and usable solutions. When I mentioned farmers as another major pathway we must forge, there simply isn't a cost-effective way currently for farmers to deal with the vast amount of manure generated in this watershed that is oversaturated with nutrients. It is imperative, therefore, that we provide the tools for environmentally conscious and economically justifiable manure management. I believe there to be a gigantic industry out there. I just don't know how to give it birth. And right now, I won't go into all, maybe we need a whole new lecture just on manure management. But honestly, think about this prospect, okay? Every year, the Port of Toledo is the most expensive place to dredge in the entire Great Lakes, $7 million a year. Okay, every year, the Army Corps of Engineers, through contracts, digs up enough sediment. There's manure a little bit in it, but mainly it's sediment. Coming down the Maumee River, has to be dug out of the waterway so the great ships can get in here. Every year they dig up enough to fill the Cleveland Browns Stadium 400 feet high. Anybody in the cement business here? You got to think like a cement person. Big quantities, okay? Manure every year in this watershed, about 450 carloads of manure. No, wait, that's the wrong number. I think it's 45,000. Manure loads in a train that would extend from here to Chicago, I guess, if you filled it all up, in 1 year. Imagine if you could blend the sediment and you could blend the manure and you could take out the nutrients, the phosphates, the nitrogen, the magnesium, the alum, whatever in it. I mean, this is what we're talking about. It's vast. It's a vast amount of quality. We don't have a market solution for that. And so that is why we are working to create a research initiative to solve this problem on the model of the Sunshot Initiative. In 8 years, the U.S. Department of Energy's research program cut the cost of solar energy by 75%. And that is exactly the kind of dramatic advance that we need to help our farmers meet the challenge, which no single one of them can do alone. Now, I was given an idea that I'll share with you, and you can let me know what you think about it. There's a hope that private parties will somehow work together in the agriculture industry to develop a clean water label for our food. Many of us seek out the organic label or seafood that is marked sustainably caught. And I believe we may need a way to vote with our wallets so when we shop, we can buy some hamburgers that maybe wouldn't come up with a side of green slime from Lake Erie, but that in fact it would be a clean water product. Just something to think about. And finally, I believe we will need a federally led coalition that can pull together the complex network of organizations, agencies, and initiatives that work on behalf of Lake Erie's future and its freshwater future in this watershed. How that happens, whether it comes through executive order, such as the one enacted with the Chesapeake Bay, or an interagency agreement with authority and funding, or if we write a separate title to the upcoming Farm Bill or to the upcoming Water Resources Bill. I'm giving a lot of thought to this now and would very much appreciate any comments on your ideas on that. We need more than good intentions to bring any such measure to pass. Lake Erie, in closing, is our life source. She is our most powerful regional economic driver. This past week, Cleveland Cliffs, a very respected company in Cleveland, has decided to make a $700 million investment on the east side of Toledo on an old property that was what was formerly called Ironville. And one of the reasons they did it, access to natural gas, but also access to fresh water. And that company will be critical to the modernization of America's steel industry, and it's happening right here in Toledo. I'm so very proud of that. But they're very close to the Maumee River and to Lake Erie, and they need its fresh water. In Lake Erie's short retention time, roughly 2.6 years, means we can impact our ecosystem if we do it right, if we're smart, relatively quickly once we get the formula. If we focus our stewardship efforts on key changes at the right times. Good science will lead us to those answers, and cooperation among all stakeholders. In the meantime, let's not allow ourselves to become discouraged or complacent. You obviously aren't in that position as Rotary. You're at the tip of the spear. Lake Erie's future really is in our hands, and she's depending on us, as are all future generations that will live in this part of the world. Thank you so very much for your attention today and all you are doing.
Thank you, Congressman Kaptur, for this wonderful presentation today. As a thank you, a donation will be made in your name to the Polio Plus Foundation. This Friday, I hope to see you all at It's a Cabaret. There are no meetings this afternoon. Please be aware that next Monday there is no Rotary meeting. No Rotary meeting next Monday because we're going to call it It's a Rest. Our staff needs a little rest. We will meet again on 4/23 with Mary Ann Golick, the new president of Lourdes University. And I know Marcy has agreed to stay to answer any questions that you might have. And Chuck, if you want to end us up with a little chuckle here.
On a Monday 2 weeks ago, the birthday of the late Ingvar Kamprad. Kamprad, a farmer's son turned multi-billionaire who revolutionized kit furniture, died in January of this year at the age of 91, leaving behind a global empire called, does anyone know? IKEA. That's correct, IKEA. Kamprad passed away peacefully surrounded by his loved ones at his home in Sweden, IKEA said in a statement. His burial was delayed, however, for several days, which the funeral director blamed on poor instructions, a missing casket handle, and a wrong Allen wrench.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, everybody, for staying late today. Congresswoman Kaptur will stay for questions. That's the end of our meeting, and I encourage you to go out and make a difference in somebody's life today.